Hi, I'm Patrick Cobb with AARP South Carolina. AARP South Carolina is pleased to sponsor the Post and Courier's Pints Politics series. AARP is a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse candidates nor parties. We work on issues important for families 50 plus in South Carolina. Follow us at aarp.org/SC.
All right, everybody. We ready? It's fun to see so many people excited about politics. I'm Autumn Phillips. I'm the editor of the Post and Courier. So the goal of the Post and Courier is to become a true statewide newspaper. We have newsrooms now in 7 different cities. And Nicole Ziggy, I want to introduce her. She's our new reporter here in Myrtle Beach. She lives here. If you get a chance, introduce yourself. Russell Fry today to talk about the U.S. House race. It's a lot of national attention. So we're going to have a good conversation today. If you're a fan of political journalism here in South Carolina, you know the name Caitlin Bird, and she has returned to the Post and Courier. She came back to the fold a week ago, and I'm really enjoying having her back, and she's going to be our moderator today. If you know people who are interested in this event, anyone who had tickets, who signed up, we're recording it, and you'll get a link in your email so you can share that out. Share the conversation.
We're pretty civil around here in South Carolina, even with our very, very competitive politics. So thank you all for being here today. I do want to be mindful of time, since this is, for many of you, maybe a lunch break. And if you don't have lunch breaks anymore, you are very lucky. Mr. Fry, let's go ahead and get started. This room and myself know that you are running for the 7th Congressional District to unseat Congressman Tom Rice. Tell us, do you drink? And if so, what is your drink of choice, since we are in a brewery?
Well, yes, I do drink an occasional beer or a bourbon. So those are my poisons of choice, so to speak. But
Is one for one mood or day and one for another?
It honestly depends. You know, if it's a hot summer day, it calls for one thing. If it's dinner with friends, it calls for another.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm a whiskey gal myself, so. And a more somber note, though, I do have to ask, given the tragic events that have happened earlier this week in Texas, it is the most deadly school shooting at an elementary school that we've had since Sandy Hook about a decade ago. What would you do to address future shootings like this from happening should you be elected to Congress? Would you be in favor of adjusting the age and whether or not 18-year-olds should be allowed to purchase weapons such as this, like AR-15s?
You know, Caitlin, great question, and I've actually reflected a lot on this. You know, I've got a 5-year-old son, and I think about what it would be like. You know, he goes to kindergarten next year, and he's going to go to public schools, and I think about him, and I think about children, and I think about the families and what they're going through, and this is an awful time, and in our thoughts, our prayers, our focus as a country needs to be on those families. What I think that we have tried to do in the State House is focus on the root of the issue, which is there has to be a serious discussion on mental health in this country. You have to address it, and COVID really exposed, and kids, and we are still seeing the unfortunate fallout from COVID and what lockdowns did to children, what the absence of interaction with other people did to children. And so in South Carolina, as an example, and I think every state should try to follow this, is that you try to secure your schools, that you put a school resource officer in every school. We stood with Governor McMaster last year, the year before, and did that in South Carolina, that you expand mental health services in schools, and particularly now, again, because of COVID and because of where can y'all hear me okay in the back? Okay, good. because of where what children are going through on a day-to-day basis in their lives with COVID and their families, you really have to have that network, that resource out there. I think that is something that is uniquely within the purview of a legislature, of a Congress, that we really have to have that. And of course, I've done a ton of work on the opioid epidemic in this state, and you cannot talk about opioids without also talking about mental health. And we really need to boil that down and get the resources to these kids that they need, particularly now more than ever because of this COVID pandemic.
But in terms of national polling for both Republicans and Democrats, there is widespread support for legislation such as tighter background checks and red flag laws. Would you be in favor of either or both of those measures, or something else?
What I won't do, Caitlin, and I think the unfortunate reality is I'm not going to politicize a tragedy. And I think that we need to be mindful. I think that we need to be mindful as legislators and as parents of what our kids face, what we know. We don't know all the facts that have come out from this, but what we do know is that kids are suffering right now. And so those are very easy, common sense fixes that could address in a very real positive way the mental stability of a child, and of course making sure that that schools have the resources they need with resource officers and ample security to be able to prevent that. Another thing, and what is increasing in polling are the possibility that you arm teachers or administrators within a school if they are comfortable with doing so. I know some states have gone that route, and having security measures in place, including within the classroom, is something that could be considered as well.
Thanks. And we're going to take it back to 2020, even though we are in the middle of a 2022 race. But the presidential election results of that 2020 race continues to come up, and obviously has been a driving factor in your decision to run. So you have supported the claim that President Trump's 2020 reelection was stolen. And by definition, stolen means it was something that was already owned and it was taken away from your possession. And the outcome of that election did show that about 7 million more people voted for President Joe Biden than for then President Donald Trump. 7 million people. None of the challenges to the results of that election have proved credible. Do you have proof, and can you explain why you still believe that that election was stolen?
Well, great question. Caitlin, I don't know, there has been a lot of lawsuits that have been litigated over 2020. Some have been successful and some have failed. What we do know, or very simply, and the RNC released a report about this after the election, and this is something that even Tom Rice said that he was against certification of that election and has walked that back. And he blamed President Trump for that. But if you look at the facts, there are certain states that executive branch officials, governors, secretaries of states, bent or broke the law and changed the rules of the game in the middle of an election. That is unacceptable.
South Carolina also adjusted its election rules in the middle of the pandemic.
Through the legislature, which if you look at how our government is structured, the legislature is the body which makes the laws. And so in some states, it was incumbent upon county election officials, statewide election officials to change the law. The proper way to do it is that if you respect the balance of powers, that you do it through the legislature. And in South Carolina, we did it for a very narrow purpose and a very narrow scope. But again, that was lawful because it came from the lawmaking body, which is the legislature. And so other states didn't follow that. And obviously, they have been reprimanded from courts. But you look at, and I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've seen clips of it, 2,000 Mules. The problem that you have is that you need to protect the integrity of the vote and people's faith that the results are what they say that they are. And in South Carolina, we've done that. We've led on that. We are considered in this state the 8th most secure state in the country from an election integrity standpoint. That's something to be proud of. And that was a Heritage Foundation study that came out about that. What the mindset in the legislature was over the last 2 years is, what can we do to make sure that we don't have the fallout like they had in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Arizona? And so we looked under the hood. I mean, common sense things, and again, this should be legislated at a state level as opposed to a federal level. if you believe in the 10th Amendment. But what should be done is, in my opinion, is you need voter ID across the country. That's easy. We have that in South Carolina. Who here agrees with that? You need common sense things. So in South Carolina, we banned groups like Facebook, as an example, from spending money or giving money to certain counties or certain election commissions. They have been proven to show that. We got rid of drop boxes. We standardized the practices across county lines so that a vote in Darlington is treated the same as a vote in Greenville. These are very common sense things. It was voted on a wide bipartisan basis, and these are things that protect your right to vote, that enhance your right to vote, but also protect the integrity at the ballot box. And again, I look at this as a lawyer, and we'll take drop boxes as a recent example. There is no chain of custody from those ballots that you can faithfully do if you drop it off 2 weeks early, that no one is watching that, manning that, making sure that the ballots are cast lawfully or whatever the case is. So you have to strengthen your laws, and it's not to prohibit people from voting, it's to make sure that the results are what they say that they are. And there are a lot of questions, and certain courts have obviously dealt with, Caitlin, certain courts have obviously scolded, reprimanded, and said that the executive branch officials in some of these states went too far.
But it still hasn't changed the results of that election. And I want to ask you, in terms of that example that you threw out with voter ID, if you're arguing in one sense that the states were not able to be trusted to do the 2020 election in other states outside of South Carolina, would you look at federal legislation that would look at a nationwide voter ID?
No, never, because it is incumbent on the states to do elections. That is within the purview of what they do in the 10th Amendment. What the federal government could do and should do is make sure and help states from a security standpoint, from a funding standpoint, to help them within their laws, but it should always come from the states. This is I am so tired of the federal government being the supreme being in our government, and that's not the case. That's not how our founding fathers intended it to be. And so for us in South Carolina or whatever state, it is up to the states themselves, but they need to learn hard lessons. And when you don't have voter ID, when you allow people to ballot harvest, when you send out, and again, who here has volunteered for my team on a door knocking standpoint? I bet you every single one of these people who raise their hands in here have gone to a house where somebody has passed away or moved since the last election. And voter rolls are imperfect. And so you have to make sure that you are who you say you are when you cast that vote. And then when the results come out, people have faith that the results speak for themselves, whatever they are.
Do you accept the results of the 2020 election?
Well, I think we just talked about this. I think there was no question
yes or no?
The election was rigged.
Do you recognize Joe Biden as president?
I mean, he is the current president in the White House, yes.
Okay. And related to the aftermath of that 2020 election, the leadership of the Republican Party has characterized the January 6th riot at the Capitol as legitimate political discourse. Is that your position as well? If not, can you please explain what it is?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Certainly. So the leadership of the Republican Party has called the January 6th riot at the Capitol legitimate political discourse. Is that your position as well? If not, can you please elaborate and explain?
Listen, I mean, I think you go back to the riots in Portland, Oregon. You go back to the riots in Kenosha. You go back to a lot of the different riots that happened. The vast majority of people that assembled on January 6th were exercising their First Amendment right. That is true. Those who broke the law should be held to account, just on our side or the other side. But again, where we are is that most of those people who assembled were doing so in a lawful purpose, with and exercising their constitutionally guaranteed right to free speech. So we don't need to paint. My concern is that Democrats have weaponized that moment to excoriate an outgoing president and to impeach him so that he could, one, never run again for public office, and two, demonize conservatives. It was a political hit. And again, people who commit crimes should be held to account for those crimes. I think everybody agrees with that. But let's not demonize everybody for what a few did.
But I will just say it was a deadly riot. It was deadly. People died. People died. People died. Out of respect, people did die. That is a fact. That is a fact. I'm going to keep going. Do you think that the people who assembled that day were Trump supporters? There's been questions raised and brought up, especially amongst Republicans, about who assembled that day.
Well, I think we're still learning that, which is why the impeachment vote by Tom Rice was so factually bereft, is that even presidents are entitled to due process. You have to put forward a record. You have to identify who these people are, where they came from, what their intent was. And so we don't know who all these people are. They're still investigating that even today, which makes the impeachment vote all the more problematic for Congressman Rice and really the direction of this country. There we go.
We didn't touch anything. I just want to say that. The mics are a little faulty.
So that's why due process is so important, and that's why it sets us apart from every other country on this planet, that anybody has a right to a trial, anybody has a right to face their accuser, anybody has a right to put up evidence against the state who might be prosecuting you. And that, of course, is ongoing now, but the problem with the impeachment was that it was so speedy. It was the most speedy impeachment in American history. There was no record that was established from a record standpoint to bring that up. Everyone knew what it was meant to do, which was to demonize President Trump on his way out with less than 5 days before he left, and to hit conservatives. That was wrong. And if you respect the institution of government, Congress, the presidency, the courts, if you respect the rule of law, like I do, and I know that most people do, that was the wrong move to make.
We're going to pivot. And this question comes to us from our sponsor, South Carolina AARP. Thank you again for being our sponsor. And this is short and simple. What is your plan to make Social Security solvent?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, first of all, you need to stop borrowing money like it's going out of style. You know, the federal government, Caitlin, can learn a thing or two from South Carolina in that we have to balance our budget every year. We have to make sure that the dollars that come in, we don't overspend, that we tuck away during good times for a rainy day fund. We have the highest reserves. I think we're like within the top 10% of states, maybe 15% of states that have rainy day funds tucked away for when there are lean times. I think the federal government has to do the same. I think we have to recognize that we have an obligation to our seniors. We have an obligation to the next generation of people after that to make sure that Social Security survives. The unfortunate reality is for people like me at 37 years old is there are a lot of questions about whether that survives or not. And you have to the folks at AARP, you have to recognize the obligations that you have bestowed upon the American people and fulfill those. But again, it starts with balancing a budget and looking at priorities within that budget. And again, we spend a lot of money on a lot of different things, but if you have made a promise to folks, you need to fulfill that. But you have to balance your budget.
The Supreme Court has signaled, based on that leaked draft opinion by Judge Alito, that the question of abortion should be returned to the states and potentially to Congress. What's your view on whether South Carolina or Congress should outlaw abortion in all cases, regardless of exemptions for cases of rape, incest, or when the life of the mother may be endangered, like in the case of ectopic pregnancies?
Well, and we'll see what happens with the Alito opinion. I mean, I do know this about justices, and if you study the courts, is that they shop around opinions quite frequently to see if they can drive consensus amongst other justices. So we don't know if that was the consensus of the court or if that was just Alito's opinion that he was shopping around. At this point, we don't know.
Well, there were judges who had signed on to that reflected it would reflect the majority, but it is a draft.
Correct, it's a draft. The concern that I have is that there was a leak to begin with, and that should be ferreted out. But it should be left to the states, and states should have that role in determining what works best for their individual people. Here in South Carolina, we passed one of the most robust pro-life pieces of legislation in the last year, the year before, that this state has ever seen, and one of the most robust in the country. And under South Carolina's law, we said that at the detection of a heartbeat, that you can no longer get an abortion. And of course, it goes into a lot of other things, but that was it. What was interesting is when you look at the legal framework of Roe and you look at the legal framework of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, I think it was the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals said very, very clearly, Supreme Court, this rubric doesn't work anymore. There are advances in science, advances in medicine. We know a lot more about a fetus than we've ever known before. And shouldn't it be up to the states to determine when that occurs and under what framework? So it should always be left to the states. And in South Carolina, we've been brick by brick. We have really done a good job since Republicans took over in the 90s, really done a good job of building up that pro-life message and starting with, and of course, every time that the legislature passes a law, it's challenged. Sometimes it's overturned, and sometimes it continues on because states have a seat at that table too, right? States and their constituencies, y'all here, have every right to elect legislators that believe what you believe. And so aren't states uniquely qualified to be able to govern themselves under the 10th Amendment without federal intrusion?
Well, and you have a seat at that table. As a member of the legislature, Governor McMaster has signaled he would support an outright total ban. What would you support?
Well, I think that's the idea. I think we should.
Total ban, no cases of
Listen, life
exceptions.
begins at conception, okay? At conception, you have your own unique DNA. There's a lot that is but at that moment of conception, there is a lot about you that is already determined. What color your hair is going to be, what color your eyes are going to be, who you are as a person. Life is precious. Life is very precious. That's who we are as a country. And so we have to be cognizant from pre-birth and at the end of life that every life is important, and that the rights of the unborn should be protected. Because, and Ronald Reagan put this very well, I think it was him that said it, there is no one who is unborn that has the ability to speak for themselves right now. So it's important, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's important for us to be that voice for them. And I think I'm a very pro-life legislator, and I will take that same approach as your next congressman in Washington.
I have two follow-ups then. Would you want to codify that at the federal level, since you've been up here talking about how it's best left up to the states?
Codify what specifically?
An outright ban on abortion.
No, I think again, it is up to the states. I think if you believe, if the opinion of the court is that it is best left up to the states and that this should return to the states, I think that it should go to the states.
Should over-the-counter, the morning after pill be banned in the state as well?
As far as the morning after pill?
Yes,
no,
sir.
No. Well, so in South Carolina, we just passed a bill, and I'm trying to remember exactly what the framework was, but that there are disclosures, that there are things that doctors must disclose when they are doing this. The morning after pill would be up to the states again on whether that is within the states. But again, it should go to the states, and the people who elect those legislators should determine if that is right for their particular state.
Do you think it's right for our particular state?
I think it is. We've already legislated that, Caitlin.
So I was just curious because of your argument about life beginning at conception. So I didn't know if you saw morning after pills as being a reversal of conception.
Look, under the current framework of where we are under Roe v. Wade, morning after pills are acceptable. But again, it should be up to the states, and we've legislated that this year on South Carolina's stance.
It's not fun without a little technical difficulty. Keeps us on our toes. So you live in this beautiful district that's highly dependent upon its beaches, its tourism, and the coast. As someone who lives in Charleston, I get that, but y'all are distinctly different, and I respect that. But Charleston in particular is quite concerned right now with sea level rise, so much so that they're actually looking at building a wall around our peninsula and around parts of the city, and is suing the fossil fuels industry over what they've claimed is the contribution to global warming. Do you believe global warming is a real human-created affliction on the planet? And what do you believe should be done by governments, either drastically or in small measures, or maybe not at all, to address this?
Listen, I think we are arrogant to think that humans can uniquely reverse what the planet has done for centuries, for millenniums. What I know to be true is that flooding happens. It is happening frequently. In South Carolina, as an example, we've put together a flood resiliency plan that allows for buyouts. It allows there's proper planning. I think that is the reality is that, one, at least on a local level, county governments need to be very cognizant that flooding exists, and it is existing. And so you have to, from a resiliency standpoint, you have to protect the natural flow of water. You have to enhance things like the river right out here so that it allows water to flow out a little bit better and a little bit easier so that flooding is mitigated to the extent that it possibly can be. So you do have to plan on the coast.
Drainage in particular.
Drainage. You do have to plan. And again, a lot of that is local, but a lot of that's federal too, and things that you can do. And on the state level, we've put our money where our mouth is as far as from a flooding perspective. And you have to find ways to deal with the issue on the coast. You have people in harm's way. You have people who have flooded, neighbors, friends of mine, even state legislator friends of mine who have personally flooded because of some of these storms. And I know Charleston's not immune to that too. And so cities, states, and the federal government need to figure out ways to plan for the future to make sure that they are protecting business owners, families, property owners, and that they are doing everything that they can to address flooding. In South Carolina, of course, a lot of that has come relatively recently, but flood resiliency is big. Heather Crawford has done a great job working within the legislature and working with us locally. We've all done what we can do to plan for the future. And so I think that's incumbent on where we need to go. And Charleston, from Myrtle Beach all the way down to Beaufort.
And Hilton Head too. Following up on that, I was at the March Trump rally that you were also at, that Katie Arrington was also at as he came to South Carolina to boost both of y'all in your challenges and your respective congressional races. And one of the things that he said while he was up there was that sea level rise was a Democratic creation and that it's just going to create more beachfront property. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't remember that quote, Caitlin, but I think
it happened.
what I think that the administration did, Trump, during the hurricanes, is that they unleashed federal dollars to help get people out of harm's way. I think that's the executive branch. I think that's the legislature, Congress appropriating some of those dollars. And again, the same thing on the state level. So, I mean, he has helped. What we need to be cautious of is that this idea of a Green New Deal, that we're going to uniquely just get rid of the sea level rise, that man has that capacity to do so. Well, to me, I think it's a power grab by the Democrats. And I think it is untenable, it is too expensive, and it's not going to work.
Are there any incremental things then that you would like to help with the resiliency piece that you were speaking to earlier, at the federal level specifically, since you are running for Congress?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've got, there are talks about a diversion canal, that may be possible. There are talks about, moving people in flood-prone areas out of harm's way. What the resiliency plan in South Carolina is doing is that people who are flooding repeatedly, financially it makes sense to buy them out and to let that land return to its natural state, because we keep fixing the same problem with people who have flooded repeatedly. Those who have flooded, once or twice, I don't know that program right now applies to them, but the resiliency is important because we're spending a lot of money to keep people in flood-prone areas that consistently flood all the time, year after year. So resiliency is a big thing along the coast and really all across. You see this obviously on the Mississippi Delta. You see this, in the Midwest. You see this really everywhere. Flooding is a problem. Flash flooding is a problem. And so planning at a local government level, being responsible planners, being responsible with land usage is important. But the resiliency side on the back end is important too.
I'm going to take a quick second right now just to, again, say thank you to Independent Republic Brewing for having us this afternoon, for opening your doors early for us. Thank you. And I'd also like to, again, give kudos to our sponsor, South Carolina AARP, who has been with us, as Patrick said, for 3 years. We couldn't do this without a lot of people supporting and believing in us, and without people like you reading us, sometimes getting frustrated with us. Call us, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. But again, I just have to stress my thanks today. Only a few more questions to go, and then you can finish your beer, and I can finish mine. But what is your solution to the immigration issue that we are seeing in this country?
Very simply, finish building the wall. You know, I met a lady in Florence at the rally, Caitlin, who she
It was very cold that day.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But I met a lady there who immigrated to this country lawfully. I think she was from Honduras or Guatemala, and she was super fired up. She was like, "You're my first vote that I'm ever going to cast, and I'm so excited." And she said, you know, people need to come to this country legally. I did it the right way. People need to do it the right way. But here's what I know about immigration, right? We are an accepting country, decades and centuries, and we accept people from all walks of life. We want them, you know. I mean, you look at the Statue of Liberty and what it says, and no one in this room, in this country, has any problem with people who come to this country legally, but you have to do it in a legal way. And why do we do that? One, so that we know who you are when you come here, and two, that it helps from an assimilation standpoint. We are a nation of immigrants, but every single group, every single country, every single ethnicity that has immigrated to this country for centuries has assimilated into our culture and our country. And we need to be cognizant of that.
Briefly, how would you pay for the completion of the wall? Just very briefly, because I also have one more follow-up about this.
Well, listen, if Congress can spend $40 billion funding another country in Ukraine, I think they can build a wall. You know, it is remarkable to me that a couple years ago, and I think that, and I'm going to, I know we've got some Tom Rice people here filming us back here and back over here, but I think, so they're probably going to say I got the figure wrong, but I think it was $12 billion to complete the wall or something like that. But we spend all this money overseas. We spend all this money doing other things for other people. When I say America first, I mean America first.
And then here's the follow-up for you, because immigration is a real issue that does uniquely affect both the 7th District and the 1st, because a lot of our tourism economy does depend on migrant and immigrant workers who come here to work. How would you see, you know, these immigration laws affecting that?
Listen, Caitlin, we have people who come here with J1s, right? J1 visas. They come here to work. They come over for a summer. They're studying. They want to make a little bit of money in the United States and have a little bit of fun too. That's fine. No problem with that. I think a lot of the seasonal help that we have are J1s. But
there's HB2 workers as well.
Correct. Yep. But again, there's a lawful process, and that when you are done, you go back to your home country. And if you want to become a citizen, great, come on. But there is a way to do that lawfully. And what's crazy to me, and this goes well beyond just immigration, is that, you know, Congressman Rice says that we don't need a southern border. We don't need a wall across the southern border, the whole southern border. Well, I think we do, right? There are holes in the wall. The wall is just a part of it. You've got to have border security. But look at what is coming across into our country right now. You have human trafficking. Betty, where's Betty at? Betty and I, she's a constituent, one of the first bills, and I'm going to take a sidebar for a second if I can.
Very quickly.
One of the first bills that I ever did was a human trafficking bill in South Carolina. And Betty asked me to draft it. She said, we have this law in other states. We need to do that here. And I said, okay. So I studied it, and I delved into it. And I was like, wow, this is big. And so we filed the bill, and we got it done. And South Carolina was considered the most improved state in the country, according to Shared Hope International, because of that law. And it gave prosecutors better tools and helped victims on the back end. So the border, you have human trafficking, you have labor trafficking, you have fentanyl that is poisoning our communities in this state and every state. And people are dying in record numbers. You have an immigration problem. We don't know who these people are. And there are a lot of problems with that too. And you look at who we are as a people. When we cease to be a country without borders, we cease to be a country. And so border security should be a top priority of the next Congress, period.
And this is our last full question, and then we'll transition to what we call the lightning round, which is fun.
Oh boy.
And I mean fun, okay? I mean actually fun, guys. But if I don't ask this question, I'm gonna get a lot of hand wringing. How can you or the federal government help relieve traffic congestion around the beach area without Interstate 73, which right now seems more of a dream than a reality?
Well, I'm pro I-73. Everyone knows that. There's a lot of reasons for that. But look at what functions government should supply, right? The federal government, anyway. Federal government should have a military, okay? They should fund core government functions like the courts and police, but one of those too that is a core function of government are roads and infrastructure. That's ports, that's airports, that's roads, that's to some extent maybe rail or help. So from a federal perspective, infrastructure matters because it allows an area to prosper. It allows for people to move in and around with relative ease, that they can get to their job, that they can see their families, they can go to work. Infrastructure is critically important. So you have to get it right. And I think the federal government, part of the problem that we've had on the state level with I-73 is that we haven't seen any federal help. I mean, Tom Rice has been there for 10 years and hasn't done a thing on I-73. Lindsey Graham has, but Tom Rice has not. And so interstate access is important. When you look at it from a hurricane evacuation standpoint, that's a safety component of people being able to get out. We have to evacuate people much earlier because of the time it takes to leave this area than we do Charleston or Beaufort because they are relatively close to an interstate. You have economic development. When a big company is looking to relocate somewhere, they ask a couple things. Are you near rail? Are you near a port? Are you near an interstate? And if you don't have an interstate, guess what? It is harder to get your widgets from the factory to the marketplace. So they don't do it. So we are uniquely qualified, I think, in this area, positioned in this area to have all types of infrastructure. And
so what would you do at the federal government to get that funding for 73?
Well, I think you got to be a fighter. Look, whatever committee you serve on is irrelevant. And if you're campaigning on the committee that you serve, that's a problem. That's half the battle. Really is about a little blue collar hustle, a little bit of street hustle to get the job done, to work with people, establish relationships. Everybody in Congress thinks that infrastructure is a big deal. But the problem that I have with the last bill that came forward was that it was infrastructure light. It was really a wish list of Democratic items, a Christmas tree for Nancy Pelosi. That's not the right play. If we're really focused on this nation's crumbling infrastructure, well, damn, we need to do an infrastructure bill that is just infrastructure. So I think you've got to work with people. There's a lot of money.
Would you work with Democrats?
There's a lot of money that you can spend anywhere. And we do that. Obviously, we just talked about the $40 billion that we sent to the Ukraine. But America First means focused on America First, and part of that is focused on a core function of government, which is infrastructure. And look, everybody agrees, we do this at the state level. Everybody agrees that we need to fund roads. In this year's budget at the state level, there's $1 billion for roads. It's the first time I think that that's happened. And so people recognize from all parties, all walks of life, the need for infrastructure because it gives people, it gives businesses an opportunity, it gives families an opportunity, and for people who are looking to have that upward mobility from working class to middle class, whatever the case is, you've got to return to the basics and you've got to focus on infrastructure.
Yes or no, would you work with Democrats to get that done?
Listen, we've done that at the State House. I mean.
But would you in Congress, yes or no?
Listen, if an infrastructure bill is infrastructure and not a wish list of Democratic socialist ideals, then I think everybody gets on board with that, right? I mean, that is a nonpartisan issue.
So now we're going to transition to the lightning round, which I promised was fun, so I hope I didn't overpromise and underdeliver. What Myrtle Beach attraction is the most Myrtle Beach to you? What just screams Myrtle Beach?
The Sky Wheel. Mm-hmm. That's the Sky Wheel. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What politically themed book, fiction or nonfiction, has stuck with you the most?
Oh, gosh. Fiction or nonfiction?
See, it's fun. It's fun.
The Federalist Papers.
Outside of Congressman Rice's vote to impeach Donald Trump, what specifically makes him unfit to serve? And I'm going to limit you to 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Listen, people want fighters in Washington. They are tired of wallflowers. And you know what? I don't see Congressman Rice fighting for us on CRT. I don't see him fighting for us on Save Women's Sports. I don't see him fighting for us when we look at where our country is. The future of our country and who we are as a people is at stake. And we talk about taxes a lot, but there is so much more going on in our country right now. And I think we need warriors in Congress and not wallflowers.
And this is the last one. Would Nikki Haley automatically have your endorsement if and or when she runs for president in 2024?
President Trump will have my endorsement when he runs in 2024.
And that is a wrap on our Pints and Politics series. Thank you all so much for coming out today. Please tip your bartenders. They've been working really hard. And thanks again for coming out. And please, stay posted. Check out Pints and Politics. We have more events coming. Some are very exciting, and I just can't tell you right yet. But if you sign up and subscribe, you'll find out first. So thanks again, y'all. Really appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Russell. Sounds fun, right?